Hello everyone. Fire Emblem as a series is well known for its use of the support conversation. Support conversations between characters help to ground out the world and the characters of the world they inhabit into a fully functional story. Fire Emblem Three Houses does a really good job with the support conversation, especially with Dimitri. Dimitri is a house lord and the future king of Fargus, and he has some really good support conversations with basically every character he has support with, so I thought Dimitri would be a good character to rank his support conversations of. The way I'll rank his support conversations is based on how they introduce character development for both the characters involved, and how well written they are all throughout. This video is part of a larger series I will upload on this channel, so if you're interested, like and subscribe. Similar to Dorothea, Dimitri had some really solid support, so this list was actually pretty difficult to make, but I am proud of the list I made, so without further ado, let's get into Dimitri's support conversations. Raphael's support Dimitri sits at the last place on this list. Obviously, with this being a shorter support conversation, I won't fault it for being short, as it cannot develop the characters as much as the ones that are longer, but there's still a lot of issues with it. The only thing connecting these two characters at all is the fact that they are both strong. But other than that, nothing else is similar. They're completely different as characters, which I normally wouldn't have a problem with it if it was going for the opposite thing, but they don't really point out each other's opposites in the support chain. I'm not really a huge fan of Raphael's character in general, so maybe that's part of why it's last place. But even with that, Dimitri has really good support with every other character on this list, so Raphael is an easy last place. Similar to Raphael's support Dimitri, Ash is shortened, so it shouldn't really have to develop the characters that much. With Ash, he actually develops over the shortened support conversation, which is why it's higher than Raphael's. As far as character development goes, Ash learns to treat Dimitri as a friend, rather than royalty, but that's basically the extent of all the character development. It's fairly basic in its writing and its story, but still sizable and good enough to make it above Raphael's support. Again, the dialogue between Sylvain and Dimitri is fairly basic, but Dimitri kind of develops. Dimitri learns to be a little more outgoing, which I guess is nice. One thing I will give it credit for is that it did a really good job of foreshadowing the eventual reveal of Dimitri's past with Edelgard, so I guess there's that. All in all, it's pretty decent, but there's not anything here that would make me want to put it anywhere above the bottom 3. Although I don't look too fondly on Catherine as a character, I do like that this support did something different with Dimitri's backstory. Instead of giving us new details on the tragedy of Duscur, this support conversation looks to reveal more of Dimitri's childhood past, before he met Edelgard. It does this through the recollection of Catherine's past, and it does a really good job of connecting Catherine and Dimitri in the past, and gives them a reason to talk in the present. And the ending is pretty unique for Catherine too. Instead of going to live a life of seclusion with Rhea, or being a mercenary that no one hears from again, she goes back to Fargus as a queen, which might not make much sense for what Catherine says she wants to do, but it's a good ending all the same. Aloysius' support Dimitri just barely misses out being top 10. Although this isn't in the top 10, this honestly is how you do a short support conversation right. Now, I don't really find a lot of supports that try to be funny in Three Houses funny, but this one's the exception. Dimitri's all-around seriousness and Aloysius' unfunniness provides for a uncomfortable silence that's actually pretty funny. They actually go for about 15 seconds without even talking, which usual supports do not. This support, even though it's supposed to be a more humorous support conversation, actually manages to develop Dimitri. He learns to have a more lighthearted approach with his soldiers, which helps them get home, and all around the support is really great, and we haven't even hit top 10 yet. For the first one in the top 10, Annette's support Dimitri doesn't really develop either of the characters that much. It instead focuses on Annette's father Gilbert's backstory and how he was different with Annette compared to Dimitri. I'm not saying they didn't develop the characters, but it didn't really focus on it. With what they did develop, it makes sense, it works fine, it's just not as memorable as some of the ones above it. Their ending's not too bad, at least. Annette helps out Dimitri so he can always have a positive attitude, which really fits with Annette's character, and will probably help out Dimitri a lot after the events of the game. I feel like it would be better if they spent a little bit more time on developing Annette and Dimitri's characters, but they can't have a million support conversations, so that's probably not going to happen. Now with Mercedes and Dimitri's support conversation, they kind of have two dynamics going on here. They have a little bit of a opposites dynamic, which characters like Dorothy and Felix, or Manuela and Hanneman have, and they have a teacher dynamic, which Felix and Flayn have. Their opposites dynamic makes sense because Mercedes and Dimitri's mood, personality, and their aspirations are completely different from one another. Their teacher dynamic works well in the support because Dimitri teaches Mercedes how to be a better swords fighter, and Mercedes teaches Dimitri how to sew. Their A-support dialogue is really well written because Mercedes helps Dimitri to realize that he's not a monster, which this isn't the only support that does that, but this support in general does it really well because Mercedes is super kind. If I'm going to be completely honest, to do support Dimitri isn't my favorite, but it's a really important support for both of these characters. It is important for Dedu to learn to be Dimitri's friend, and it's important for Dimitri to let go of the tragedy, but that being said, everything else here is kind of forgettable for me. Nothing really latched onto me as far as the dialogue went, but it gives the edge over Mercedes because this support is very important. In my eyes, Flayn's support Dimitri is streets ahead of Dimitri's support Dedu. The dialogue, pacing, development, and ending are way better than Dimitri's support Dedu, especially with the development. Dimitri helps Flayn to get over her fear of sleep and waking up to no one being there, and Flayn's knowledge and experience helps Dimitri lessen his torment for the tragedy of Duscur. The support also has a really good progression of its writing, starting out with Dimitri liking Flayn's food, although he obviously reveals that he can't taste it, to him actually being able to taste your food in the A support. Little details that are brought up in the support actually show how deep-seated Dimitri's torment for the tragedy of Duscur really is. The only thing that really brings it down for me is that Flayn's fear of sleep isn't really developed on after it was initially brought up. But regardless of that, this is still an amazing support. Ingrid's support Dimitri just barely makes it out of top 5. This support helps Ingrid move on with her path with Glenn, which the only other support that can do that is Ingrid's support with Glenn's brother, Felix. Dimitri might not develop much as a character compared with other supports, but the dynamic of Ingrid and Dimitri being past friends, and the fact that they are very similar as characters, help to move this up on the list. Their pacing in the dialogue actually works really well because their disagreement about the tragedy of Duscur and Glenn in the early parts gets wrapped up in a nice little bow at the end. Happy support Dimitri is number 5 in this list, most because of the good sense of mystery it creates all throughout the dialogue. The mystery starts off small, with Happy and Dimitri just wanting to know how they met each other. But as the story progresses, so does the mystery. It goes into how Edelgard's mother fit into Happy's kidnapping, and it finally progresses to a satisfying ending and conclusion. This support's progression is its biggest strength, and although there aren't many significant flaws as it is top 5 on a list with a very strict competition, you see there is still a little bit of a flaw I can find in it. Depending on how you get it, the conclusion can either seem completely obvious or completely surprising. Overall, it is an amazing support. In my first support conversation ranking, I said Bios support would be ranked differently because Bios is a silent protagonist and therefore can't really develop over the course of the game. But somehow, as small as it might have been, Bios still managed to change a little bit, or at least develop more. Byleth, if the dialogue prompt is chosen by the player, can say that mercenary work is never easy for Byleth, which helps ground Byleth more as a character and not just seem as a blank slate. Although, I'm not really sure if I can really call it character development or not, because it's really up to you whether Byleth says it or not. Nevertheless, this is still an amazing support, especially for Byleth standards, which, although Byleth has some really strong supports, a lot of them are kind of weak in my eyes. Similar to Happy support Dimitri, this support's biggest strength is its pacing. This support conversation would be an easy number 1 if the cutscene that played after the Grounder field map was part of the actual support conversation, but nevertheless, this is an awesome support chain. The number 2 and 3 spots arguably could be interchanged with each other, and with the right argument I could see that way too, but I feel like Gilbert's is just a little bit worse with the next spot on the list. And that's not even saying the support is bad. This is probably one of the better supports in the entire game, but it isn't as amazing as the next 2 spots. This support is actually really sad, even for Dimitri standards, who has some really sad supports over his 15 support conversations. Now, the voice acting in this game is really good, and especially with this support conversation, the voice acting helps convey the sad tones of the support conversation. For Dimitri, and especially for Gilbert, they both develop a lot of the support, and they help each other not to blame themselves or hate themselves with the events of the tragedy of Dusker. Now, I really like the support, but I will admit that the ending these two characters share is very similar to Gilbert's base ending. But regardless of that, this support is a great addition to the podium. This support conversation is really amazing. Felix develops most out of any of his other supports in the game, and Dimitri probably the most out of any of his support conversations in the game. So that should give you an idea on how good the number 1 spot is. This support conversation really just shows you how insane Dimitri was for most of the game, and how far he's come when it gets to the A support. The A support in particular is really well done. It strikes a very nice parallel between Dimitri and Felix. While they were both very grieved at the end of the tragedy of Dusker, Felix chose to hold on to it and became even more distant than usual. Dimitri, on the other hand, chose to let it out and became a homicidal maniac. More than any other support in the game, it really shows that Felix isn't emotionless, and is really similar to Dimitri at the end of the day. There's a really nice touch in the B support as well. When Felix shows Dimitri the sword, after the support is over, it goes to your inventory, and it's a really powerful sword at that, so it's a plus for me. The ending these two characters have is a very nice end to their friendship, and parallels their father's friendship in the past. In my first support conversation ranking video, I said that Dorothea and Ferdinand's support was my second favorite in the entirety of 3 houses. Well, the reason Felix and Dimitri's support is in number 1 is because number 1 is my favorite support in 3 houses. Yes, Dimitri and Marianne's support conversation is my favorite in the entirety of 3 houses, and number 1 on this list. Dimitri and Marianne are so similar to each other in many ways. They both have a lot of grief and tragedy in the backstory of their stories, and through that, they manage to help each other in their own way. The dialogue is really well done from start to finish. There is no instance of bad writing at all in the support chain. In all the support conversation these two characters have, in my opinion, not one develops these characters as much as the support chain. The ending too is really well done. They live peacefully as king and queen of Fargus, and when Dimitri dies, he dies happily. When I started making a list for this video, I was kind of unsure about every other support conversation, but this one I knew from the start that was going to be number 1 on the list. It's really amazing, and it's definitely deserving of the number 1 spot. Thanks so much for watching! Dimitri is one of the better characters in 3 houses, so I thought a support conversation ranking was due for him as well. If you're wondering which character I'll cover for my next support conversation ranking, it'll be Claude Von Regan from the Golden Deer. It won't be my next upload, but it'll be definitely coming out soon. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.